Going to call to order the June 14th Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. And at this time, I would like to ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, we have a published agenda this evening, and are there any amendments to this evening's agenda? And if not, is it? Oh, all right, now we're recording. You told me we were ready.
I'm moving it right now.
All right, okay, that's right, 2 recordings going. All right, so we have a published agenda. Are there any modifications? If not, I would enter for Clausen.
Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Clausen, second by Councilmember Lucarelli to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda has been set this evening. This time, we are taking our first public comment period. I see lobbyists in the audience, so I don't believe they have public comment, and a couple of staff members, and I see only one staff member online. So unless Jackie Brown wants to provide public comment, you can raise your hand, Jackie, and Brandy would promote you. Not, we'll close the first as a comment period. The second one is at the end of this evening's meeting. So we have a published consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Diener, second by Councilmember Terneri to approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda has been approved. We're to item 5, presentation by Gordon Thomas Honeywell, our lobbyist. Josh Weiss is here today to give us a presentation on the 2022 legislative session, and he brought Annika Vaughn with him, his trusty assistant.
I do. I bring Annika with me as many places as possible. She helps keep me on track, very ably so. So good evening, Mayor, members of council and staff and the public. Nice to see you all. I think it has been 2 years since we've been here in person with you, so very nice to see you all. So yeah, Annika and I tonight are going to share this presentation. We have, I would also say, let's see, here's my pointer. We have several goals.
Brandy, if I may, is it possible for you to put that presentation on the Zoom screen too? I don't know if all the council members can see the screen to the sides or not.
We could just move and sit in front of that.
It's your meeting. You if it's a problem, Brandy, it's okay. That magic. Thank you.
Very impressive.
Very good.
So let's see, where are we here? We do want to, this is technically our end of session report, even though that was a couple of months ago now. We want to talk generally about what happened in session, what happened specifically about the city's priorities. There were a bunch of additional issues that we ended up working on behalf of the city and otherwise that you would just find interesting. And then we're ready and suggesting that we start talking about next steps for the 2023 session already, believe it or not. I will just say as well as we go along tonight, please feel free and interrupt us with questions at any time. We can get it back on track if we need, when we need to. And the other thing, if there's additional details that you feel like you're missing, we did give you, I know it's been a bit now though, detailed written end of session report, and all the things we're going to talk about tonight are in that written report as well. So like I said, we're going to take turns, and I'm going to turn it over to Annika here, and she's going to take the next section.
Thanks, Josh, and good to see you all tonight. So it's been a long time since legislative session concluded, so some of this might be a little bit old news, but I'm just going to do a quick overview of the lay of the land this session. It was the second year of the 2-year legislative biennium. It was the short session, which lasted 60 days, compared to last session, which was the long 105-day session when they adopted their two-year biennial budgets. This session, they adopted their supplemental budgets. Those are usually minor adjustments to the larger biennial budgets they adopt in the year prior. But this was a very unusual supplemental budget year for two reasons. They had an extremely large operating budget for a supplemental budget year. It was actually the largest operating budget in history. So tons of new spending, which is not typical of a supplemental budget year. And they also adopted a transportation revenue package, which is basically unheard of in a short 60-day session. They usually don't have enough time to come to agreement on a transportation revenue package. They also adopted redistricting maps. Those will go into effect in November. Democrats continue to hold strong majorities in both chambers, and they also continue to control the agenda of what bills go through the legislature. Any legislation left over from 2021 did carry over since it was the second year of the biennium, in addition to any new proposals that were considered. So in total, they considered a little over 1,000 bills, and 309 of those bills passed the legislature, so about a third, which is typical of most sessions. You guys can barely see this slide, so I'm sorry, there's lots of information, but it should be in your packet. So if you want to look in more detail, check that out, and it's also included in our written report. I already mentioned the operating budget this year was very large. It was a $63 billion total operating budget. Also unusual, they transferred money out of the operating budget into the transportation budget and also into the capital budget to fund some of their new spending. They don't usually like to do that. Operating budget writers are very protective of the general fund. So again, just an example of how much money, surplus money, they really did have to spend this session. For local investments, there was funding for GMA and salmon recovery planning, funding to help transition individuals living on public right-of-ways into safer housing solutions, landlord and eviction prevention assistance, and then all local governments receive marijuana revenue increase. And those investments will come online at the start of the new fiscal year. The capital budget, it was much more of a typical supplemental capital budget. There was new spending, but nothing crazy. They had spent $62 million for local projects, which compared to last year, that was last year's biennial budget was $250 million in the capital budget, so much smaller. There were lots of investments in housing and homelessness and behavioral health. That continues to be a high priority for the legislature. Josh is going to touch on some of those investments later in the presentation. Most of the action was in the transportation budget. They did pass the Move Ahead Washington package, which is a $17 billion investment over 16 years. They used a wide variety of revenue sources to fund this package, including the one-time operating budget support that I talked about. That was $2 billion, and then also ongoing operating budget support. They also swept the Public Works Assistance Account, which you're probably very aware of, but that was obviously a huge blow to cities. And then they also used funding from the Climate Commitment Act, federal funding, and then a variety of fee increases. About a third of this revenue comes from the Climate Commitment Act. That's reserved for decarbonizing projects, and unfortunately that was where the majority of new spending really came in. This wasn't a very good revenue package for municipalities. There really wasn't very much local investment provided. They focused on funding state maintenance and preservation needs, funding operating and capital needs for the ferries, a few highway mega projects, state culvert obligations, and then a backfilling connecting Washington projects that had cost overruns. So I am going to talk about our funding request, and then a few of our policy requests, and then going to kick it back over to Josh to talk about some of the bills that we also worked on. We requested $6 million for 2 compact roundabouts at SR 16 and SR 160. This is the fourth session that we've made this request, so you're all very familiar with this project. Our legislators are also very familiar with this project and supportive. I think you may remember a few years back, we also took transportation leadership on a tour of these projects, which paid off last year. The project was included in both transportation revenue package proposals in 2021, but with the leadership change in the Senate, there was a new transportation chair in the Senate. They scrapped the old proposals and decided to work off something different because they didn't want, neither party wanted to pass a new gas tax increase. So Move Ahead Washington included $665 million in new state and local highway projects. That's just not very much for state and local highway projects compared to a typical revenue package, which is usually focused on funding highway projects. About the same amount that's spent on highway projects goes into backfilling 3 connecting Washington projects that had cost overruns, and then over $2 billion goes to new mega projects. So that's really where most of the new project spending went. In the region did get some money, just not on the local level. There was money provided for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge to decrease tolls. There was $75 million provided for Gorst, and then Kitsap Transit gets an electric ferry for $6.5 million. And I think Josh is going to talk about this later when we talk about next steps, but it's not that this project isn't supported by our legislators or by the transportation chairs. This just wasn't a session that had opportunity for local highway projects. So I'm just keeping the message going that this is a need in our community and looking for opportunities later to take local funding. Again, sorry for the small font, but we also supported a proposal to increase funding for the Department of Natural Resources Derelict Vessel Program. This was a DNR request bill, and there was a lot of support, bipartisan support for this proposal. The request was for an additional $5 million a biennium, which is a shift of 25% of the watercraft excise tax into this program. Currently, all the money from the watercraft excise tax just goes into the state general fund. The efforts to support this bill began in the interim. We sent a letter requesting that the governor included this funding shift in his budget, and it was funded in the governor's budget. And then, as I already mentioned, this was widely supported, bipartisan bill, and it did pass with strong support in both chambers. The funding will take effect in the new fiscal year, so that funding will come online pretty soon. We also supported a bill that would allow you to go out to the voters for additional 10-year increments of the voter-approved sales tax TBD. Under current law, cities can ask the voters to approve the sales tax TBD for up to 20 years, and it didn't allow any further extension by the voters. So this bill would have allowed you to go back out to the voters. Kind of wonky, this bill had a lot of strong support in both chambers. It was sponsored by the Senate ranking member on the Transportation Committee, but they just ran out of time to pass the bill. So the bill didn't pass, but instead they included this language in the transportation bill. So you still do have this authority, it just wasn't the vehicle that we were expecting it to pass. So cities do have the ability to ask the voters to approve this sales tax for an for additional 10-year increments, and then it also allows you to councilmanically adopt an additional 0.1%. We also monitored the foster pilot program. There wasn't very much action that happened on this work group this year, but they have begun their interim work. They met on May 24th, and then they're also scheduled to meet next week. So no legislative action that happened in the last year, but this will be a topic that comes up next session. Task force members have stated in the meeting that happened on May 24th that they don't intend to reauthorize the work group's work, and they are hoping to bring back recommendations to the legislature for the 2023 session. So definitely something that we are closely watching for next session. And I'm going to pass it back over to Josh.
Very good. Thank you, Annika. So on our policy priorities, we definitely were paying very close attention to the efforts this last session to make some amendments to the police reform legislation that was passed in the 2021 legislative session. The legislature did pass 3 significant reform bills. The first was that House Bill 2037, which did provide a definition for use of force, and as you were listening to the debate around these bills and these policies from your law enforcement community, I'm sure you heard about the need for a definition of use of force. And one of the important things about this definition is it does say that officers, it makes it very clear that officers are allowed to stop individuals if they has reasonable suspicion of a theft or a crime that is about to occur or did just occur. So this question about being able to detain people while an investigation is going on was included in this bill. The second bill there, 1735, the Involuntary Treatment Act Community Caretaking, did clarify as well that officers are allowed when an individual is having a behavioral health issue. They haven't necessarily broken a law, but it's clear that they're in need of some assistance, and it's necessary to take that person into custody so that they can be taken somewhere to get treatment. It is an allowable use of force to in fact do that. And then the third bill, 1719, had to do with non-lethal use of force. So this was the issue from the year before, 2 bills that were passed that weren't lined up in their definitions, and they inadvertently banned non-lethal like bean bags or rubber bullets that oftentimes, I think bean bags always are discharged from 50 caliber shotguns. That was actually outlawed in one of the other bills. So this clarified the 2 of those. Our officers now will again be able to use those types of non-lethal force. I also just want to, well, let me finish by saying the bill that did not pass that you probably have heard in the media about concern and problems with is that they did not pass 5919, which had to do with vehicular pursuit. Our officers are still prohibited, except in cases of imminent death or harm, from engaging vehicular pursuits. That was a debate that was going until the very last hours of session. Some jockeying back and forth between the House and the Senate, and they just in the end weren't able to get it across the line. I will say on all of these bills that Chief Brown did a fantastic job talking about these issues. We had meetings before legislative session with several legislators from our delegation. It was a good, factual-based, respectful, very thorough conversation, both with the delegation members, but also Chief Brown as well. So a very good representation, in my opinion, of the city and the concerns around these policies. So I just want to say thanks to him for that. We continue, I'll talk about it for the next session. We continue to look for opportunities where they are presented to try and get some relief on providing published newspaper notices of your public meetings and other types of notifications that are required, and ability to use the website for those types of notices. There just really was not the opportunity this session, and this is, you're all aware, I see some smiles on council, this is an ongoing issue. The legislature really hasn't been very sympathetic to local government concerns, and this session was no exception. On housing homelessness, Annika mentioned this before, just really significant, continued, these are additional dollars focused on capital projects in the housing and homelessness realm. So, you know, they passed an operating capital budget, a supplement, let me try that again, a biennial capital budget last legislative session, which had a number of funds in it for capital affordable housing. They came back this last session and piled on additional resources for that, which is a very important investment. They also created a new program for local governments to work with DOT on getting people moved out of rights-of-way, along state rights-of-way, along the freeways and highways. And that Department of Commerce is in the process right now of putting guidelines together for local governments on that. The Apple Health and Homes program was a significant new policy, basically saying that anyone that's getting state support for medical care can also receive supportive housing as part of that support, which was also a significant financial investment. And then again, the legislature continues to invest in behavioral health, both at the local community level and providing grant sources for jurisdictions and nonprofit providers to do community behavioral health centers, but also investments in the state hospitals where the individuals with extreme cases are provided treatment. You also probably heard a whole lot of conversation this legislative session about the middle housing, really focused on the affordable housing conversation and debate. The governor came out with request legislation right before the beginning of legislative session. It had not been talked about with local governments. It really was a surprise. We knew that there were conversations going on, but those conversations didn't include any local governments, and so when we finally saw the draft, it was not something that we were prepared for. It would have mandated originally middle housing in single-family residential zones to allow up to sixplexes, townplexes, and courtyard apartments. Obviously, an incredible amount of reaction from primarily cities, but also counties, as well as just citizens, residents of the state, being concerned about this. We did a lot of work with the Association of Washington Cities. This is where, having our voice there for the city of Port Orchard to say this is specifically how it's going to impact the city of Port Orchard, and being able to help the association with that broader narrative, as well as reaching out to your 26th legislative district legislators. They were incredibly helpful. All three of them, at different points in time as this bill moved forward, were able to provide us critical support for the overall effort, and ultimately were able to stop this bill. So we'll talk about this as an issue that's coming up again next session, but this was a pretty significant effort this last legislative session. Related to that, there was legislation that would have required cities in order to incentivize accessory dwelling units as a method of providing affordable housing, would have restricted you from imposing owner occupancy requirements, except in like the VRBO type of short-term rentals. And that bill also, we in the city family were able to stop. The legislature created a body camera grant program for local governments because we know that body cameras are here and here to stay. They created this program at the Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. They essentially gave money for the association to get the program up and running, but they didn't provide any of the actual grant dollars to give local jurisdictions. So that will be a conversation that'll be happening in next session, is actually providing you money that you can apply for the grant program. Annika mentioned the Tacoma Narrows financing, providing $130 million into that fund, with the expectation that the Transportation Commission will be lowering toll rates going forward. If you recall from last session, one of the conversations we were having then was trying to get permanent authority for cities and other local governments and state agencies to hold meetings in the format that we're holding it right now, in a virtual format, hybrid format. Originally, when the pandemic hit us, the governor issued an emergency order that gave us all the authority to meet in a virtual format. There's not the underlying base authority for cities or agencies to do that. So we were glad this session to have this bill passed. It does give not just the authority when there's a statewide emergency and the governor again declares an emergency, but it gives you the authority. Say, for instance, there's a tornado in your community and you need to go to remote meetings. You can declare an emergency at the local level and you can meet in a hybrid format. And there are sidebars, I want to be very clear, for making sure that you provide opportunity for the residents and citizens to listen in and be engaged in a virtual format as well. So you can't just take it on a conference call offline with nobody listening. That was a big win for local governments. We also saw a bill pass this year that finally moved the update cycle under the Growth Management Act from every 8 years to every 10 years. That's something we've been working on with the city for a number of years now, so that was a good thing. So I did mention next steps. We do, I think you know from working with us, that we very much do view advocacy as a year-round activity. There's lots of opportunity to educate and work with our legislators about priorities. And when I say our legislators, not just the 26th district, but chairs of committees and other interested parties. We have been in conversation with the mayor about an interim work plan lining out what Annick and I will be doing for you this interim more specifically. There are a number of work groups, stakeholder groups that the legislature put together. There's a lot of conversation going on about salmon recovery. That'll be something we're paying attention to. There's an ongoing process for updates to the Growth Management Act. There will be recommendations coming to the legislature this fall. The Association of Washington Cities and WASAC have been called to the table along with Department of Transportation and legislators to talk about how funds that are coming down federally through the federal government are split between the state and local governments, and the cities, I'm proud to say, are represented by our mayor, Mayor Patonsu. And so I know the first meeting was just held last week on that, and that will be an ongoing conversation this interim. But that's a pretty significant kind of under the radar conversation that could have really significant transportation funding impacts of large amounts of dollars.
Billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars, thank you. We also, Annika mentioned the Foster Task Force, and there's been one meeting, there will be additional meetings, and we do think there will be recommendations coming out of that with Port Orchard having one of those pilot programs. We know that's incredibly important, but it is sounding like from the co-chairs there's going to be a desire to bring forward to the legislature some kind of long-term fix to the legal issue that they have right now and the inability of Department of Ecology to approve new municipal water rights with mitigation plans. So that'll be something that we'll be watching really closely. We do want to start talking about, and actually I have a slide here, some potential ideas for the 23 session. I just want to put out there that this is one of the years when I think our ability to adapt is going to be very important. You're all aware of sort of the unease with the national economy. We're going to watch very closely what the state revenue forecasts that come out at the state level every quarter, how state revenues are doing. So far, they're solid, but if we do enter into a recessionary period, the state may not have all of the dollars that they had last session to spend. And I've been through, I'm sure you have too, periods of time when the legislature is cutting budgets instead of adding to budgets. And so we'll be prepared for reacting to that. The other thing that is just really, we've seen more retirement in existing legislators between the end of session, actually even before the end of session, and now than probably any other campaign season that I can remember. We're just seeing a really large turnover, and we really do expect this election to be significant and very contested. You're going to be right here in the middle of it. Probably target number one is the 26th District Senate race. So you're going to get, if you aren't already, going to be getting bombarded with that very hotly contested race. And we expect to see a lot of that uncertainty about what happens with the elections through, really pretty much through November. The legislature will be meeting pre-session on December 1st and 2nd in person. We do hope and expect them to meet in person. That will be an opportunity for us to be gathering signatures if we decide to run any bills, have conversations about budget priorities as well, and then session starts on January 9th. We've been having some preliminary conversations with the mayor about possible legislative priorities. I will just say, as a long session, it should be a healthy capital budget year. I think there will be capacity in the capital budget. I also mentioned the uncertainty around the operating budget. So there may or may not be ability to ask for operating dollars. Transportation budget, I think, is going to be very iffy. We were all sort of, I don't want to say promised, that's too strong, but the discussion when they passed the Move Ahead Washington package was that they would come back in this next biennium and talk about a potential typical project, gas tax based transportation revenue package where we would have more opportunity for projects like Sedgwick. I'm personally very skeptical about that, given what gas prices are doing through the summer, and a large part of that could depend too on what happens in the election. But I do think we need to be continuing to talk about the need for projects like Sedgwick at the local level. So it's kind of the bigger context in the three budgets. There's always opportunity to move policy issues. So the list here, we do want to continue talking about Sedgwick. We also know that there is potentially some discussion happening about the opportunity maybe to have a bridge solution at Sedgwick that doesn't require the roundabouts, maybe with some traffic signalization, coordination with the state. And so maybe that's something that we can continue talking about and provide a solution for until we're able to get the roundabouts funded. The community center, exciting things. We watched the presentations you've had on this 6 weeks ago or so. It's really cool to see that project coming along. We know that there's going to be need for design dollars for that plaza. Perhaps that is your capital budget request. I talked about vehicular pursuits. That bill's going to come back. Foster pilot I mentioned as well. I think we're going to have a very unique voice in the foster discussion, and so having you think about having the city put some political capital and energy into that may be very well worth your while. Public records reform, I think we always need to be there ready to talk about that. We talked about newspaper notices. We do anticipate this middle housing conversation is going to be coming back. The Association of Cities is putting together a stakeholder group and discussion, a facilitator process over the interim. We'll be closely following that. Hopefully something can come out this interim that is not contentious, that we can enter the legislative process with an agreement that works for at least a number of cities and the advocates out there, and we don't have to be fighting again next session. That would be nice, but we'll have to see if that comes about. And then finally, we know that homelessness, substance use disorder treatment, mental health treatment are going to continue to be hot topics for you at the city level. The legislature will be talking again about their long-term solution for the Blake Supreme Court decision that decriminalized possession of illegal substances. That's going to expire at July of 2024, so the legislature will be debating that again as well. So just lots of potential topics there for us to talk about, and we pretty much, this is where we say we look forward to working with you over the interim to really narrow this down, and with your delegation as well. Do want to take opportunity to answer any questions, and do just want to say thank you. We appreciate you and appreciate the partnership. It's been successful and it's been enjoyable for us as well. So thank you for your partnership.
And if I can just expand, when Josh was referring to the Sedgwick signals synchronization, there could be an opportunity. Our traffic consultant has pointed out for about $300,000. One of those signals is ours, 2 of them are the state's, and to engage the state in improving the technology there and synchronizing those lights, and it could get us a few years down the road before we, with better traffic control. It isn't going to solve the traffic going up over the hill on Sedgwick, but at least, coming from the Lowe's light and getting to Highway 16 could be improved through that optimization. So, yes, Scott.
We have a window because after a certain population that we reach, then those roads become ours, right?
Bay Street.
Bay Street, okay.
Bay Street and Mile Hill. So that's,
Okay.
I don't believe Sedgwick falls under that mandate. It's a different type of state highway, 16 and Sedgwick are. So, but that's a good question. Other questions for Josh? Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Josh and Annika. It was very comprehensive and a very good wrap-up. I agree with your comments regarding the next session, that it's till the election happens. It's going to be very interesting, to say the least, with the makeup of the Senate and the House. And I know that you've been very supportive of the city, and your work with the mayor is very greatly appreciated. I think you hit the nails just right on the head on what our asks are going to be. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions?
Thank you.
Josh, I just want to thank you and Annika. You're great partners in our efforts in Olympia, and I really enjoy working with the both of you.
The feeling's mutual, and hopefully next session we'll be seeing some of you as well coming down to Olympia with us to knock on some of those legislators' doors.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, it is very powerful, yeah. No, okay, nice to see you all. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. And Brandy, this is a nice view for the, whatever it is we've got on these other TVs to share with the viewing members and the public too. So if we're able to do it, whether it's agendas or whatever we're looking at on the other TVs, I think it's helpful, so.
Could
Yeah.
be bigger.
Yeah, we could, and maybe after our executive session, we could move that forward, but it does, the challenge of that is that it blocks anybody that's sitting on that side of the room from seeing you guys, so. All right,
We haven't
we're
had that
on
problem yet.
to item 7, which is a collective bargaining session pursuant to RCW 4230.1404B. The city council will enter into a closed session to discuss planning or adopting the strategy or position to be taken by the governing body during the course of any collective bargaining, professional negotiations, or grievance or mediation proceedings, or reviewing the proposals made in the negotiations or the proceeding while in progress. So we need 10 minutes, I would say 10 minutes, and we will be back in about 10 minutes.
And there will be action to follow.
Action to follow, that's correct.